Yeah, what's up, everybody? It's me, Dan, moderately anonymous MTG. We are here today to do another discussion on some new cards coming out in the new set. Today, I want to talk about a really interesting counterspell and whether or not I think that it's going to be good in cEDH. If you haven't seen this card yet, it is called Stern Scolding. Scolding is an instant for a blue that says counter target creature spell with power or toughness 2 or less. So I've seen a ton of discussion on Twitter about this card and whether or not it's good. And most people are of the opinion that it is not very good, but I think it's actually a pretty interesting card and I kind of think that it might see some play. So let's talk about why. First of all, let's address why people don't think that this is a good card. The number one reason is that it is just conditional. And while lots of 1-mana counters are conditional, like Dispel or Flusterstorm, this one is conditional in that it can only counter creatures, which is by the numbers the lowest count for card type that you're going to see in cEDH. So the obvious criticism here is that there are plenty of ways that you die in cEDH that are not 2 creatures at all. There are going to be plenty of times when you're just sitting there with your blue open, Scolding in hand, and you're going to die to Ad Nauseam or Underworld Breach. However, I do want to note there are equally as many 1-mana counters that will also get got by Breach a million times out of a million. You can't Dispel a Breach, you can't Flusterstorm one, you can Flusterstorm some of the things that lead up to it or come out of it, but a lot of the times you're just going to die to Underworld Breach anyway unless you got that Swan Song in hand. So while there are plenty of ways to die with a Scolding in your hand, I think that there are plenty of ways to help yourself not die with a Scolding in hand as well. So let's just quickly go over some of the creatures that it does counter. The 2 most obvious and the most important are Dockside Extortionist and Thassa's Oracle. Those are the 2 cards that you're going to see the most in cEDH. And very importantly, Scolding stops ETBs from happening. Other creatures that we can get with this include Archon of Emeria, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Opposition Agent, Drannith Magistrate, Lavinia Azorius Renegade, Grand Abolisher, not to mention a lot of the most popular commanders in the format, Kinnan, Tymna, Thrasios, Najeela. The list goes on and on. I'm not usually a really big fan of restrictive spells like this. I think if you're going to go after a restrictive spell, things like Dispel, maybe even Miscast are the kinds of spells that you want for that cheapened mana cost. But I think that Scolding actually fills a kind of unique slot that we don't see in a lot of other counter spells. So there are 2 main comparisons that I think you can probably make with Scolding. The first is Spell Snare. Spell Snare, also an instant for a single blue mana, says counter target spell with converted mana cost 2. So this does also get Thassa's Oracle, Dockside, Underworld Breach, Tainted Pact, Grand Abolisher, a lot of similar things and also some things that Scolding can't get that are really important. A lot of the things that Spell Snare counters are things that win opponents the game. In comparison, Scolding counters a lot of things that make you lose the game. Scolding hits all of these really problematic things that we talked about already, but it also hits very important things that can come down at instant speed that can stop you from winning the game, or at least very seriously tempo you out. I think we've probably all been in a situation where we've cast maybe a Gamble or a Vampiric Tutor, and we've got a single mana open in hand, maybe we've got a Spell Pierce and we're prepared to fight an opponent's Dispel or Spell Pierce, but we get got by an opposition agent. And obviously in a lot of situations, it's a very devastating loss to either have to gamble and discard the card out of your hand, or just to lose your tutor, reveal your info to your opponent, and then probably go on to not get the pieces you need to win the game. So in that regard, what I really like about Scolding is that it's a spell that can be used both proactively and reactively. It can help you win the game, or it can help you not lose the game to an opponent's Oracle or whatever it is. The other comparison to be made is for straight up creature removal, and we'll say Bolt or a Path to Exile. Both 1 mana, both can remove a lot of creatures. For Bolt, a lot of the same creatures, not necessarily all of the same ones. Some of the best creatures that Bolt can't hit that Scolding can are things like Urza, Lord High Artificer, or Seaborn Muse. I think a lot of cEDH decks generally should be running more targeted removal, because Scolding is never going to be able to hit really problematic creatures like Winota and things like that. They're going to be able to dodge that clause about power and toughness. But very importantly, the difference between removal spells and between Scolding is that it stops ETBs. Like we said, Dockside and Thassa's Oracle are the 2 most common creatures in the cEDH meta. Being able to stop those ETBs from happening is the most important part of that transaction if you're going to interact there. And of course, if we think about something like Grand Abolisher, if Grand Abolisher comes down, we're never going to have the opportunity to Bolt or Path to Exile it. So while it's true that targeted removal does solve a lot of the same problems that Scolding does, Scolding is importantly just a little bit more versatile than that. Again, it can be used proactively or reactively. I think the real problem for Scolding is the question of what counterspell is it going to replace in your blue EDH deck, and that question I think is a lot harder to answer than is it better or worse than Spell Snare or Bolt. I don't necessarily see Scolding making it into a lot of EDH decks or really becoming a longtime staple of the meta, but I do think it fills a hole that we have in our cEDH meta defenses, and until a new and better card comes along, I could see decks that want to play a control game, like maybe Tivit wanting to sleeve this up, and maybe even really proactive Grixis decks that want to be able to counter problematic things for that 1 mana. For a deck like Rogsai that can't really afford to run a mana drain in it because it really wants to be so low to the ground, having the ability to counter an opposition agent or a rule of law creature with a single blue mana is really good. So those are my quick and dirty thoughts on Stern Scolding. I don't think this is going to become a format staple, like I said, but I do think it's a very interesting card, and I'm excited to see what people are going to do with it in the cEDH meta. Maybe nothing at all. I could be totally wrong about this, but I do think it's a card that addresses some important problems in the format, and until something better comes along, I think maybe it could see some play. I appreciate y'all watching this far. If y'all had a good time, please hit the follow and subscribe button if you're not already. If you want to support the show, go hit up our Patreon and use our affiliate links for Dragon Shield and TCG Player. All of those links are right in the video description below. And we will see you next time, everybody. Be good to yourselves.